What's good, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to What If Naruto. Oh wait, wrong intro. What's good, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to What If Deku had Raven's powers. You know, her character has always intrigued me. I mean, the concept of powers being linked to emotions always bugged me until I got older and began to write my own stories. And you know what? I get it now. So I think it's time for a bit more of a mature story. That said, enjoy. Also, don't forget to leave a like.
Hey Ross, sauce it up.
Alright, we start our story off with young Inko, who, for not getting a yellow check mark on my video purposes, let's just say that she was into some very strange things. In her youth, she started getting into a bunch of conspiracy theories, and all this stuff eventually led her down a rabbit hole, which led her into some way more strange things. One day, one of her friends invites her to this thing because they need some sort of girl for a ritual or something like that. And she would be told that it was for some sort of different purposes, that they were just going to be summoning like a spirit of some sort, right? So Inko's down, you know, she's like, all right. She goes over there, and in a very far part of the woods, she would think it's really strange because it took them like an hour to get to the spot. But once they end up arriving, she sees like this circle on the ground drawn in blood. And she just looks around to see that everybody's wearing like these masks for some sort of special group. Cult. Right? Cult. Nah, but seriously. They, from here, go on to pretty much welcome her. And they just immediately get into it. Like, as soon as this happens, they would light a bunch of different candles and they just start singing these weird chants out of nowhere. They start pretty much talking gibberish, and like the blood, it turns white, and then it like fire just bursts out of it, right? And when this happens, this creature, this being would get summoned out of it. And this creature in the smoke just looks at everybody, right? And it just kills them, right? And after it does that, it then turns towards the direction of Inko. It gives her a very evil smirk, and then it you know, it gets down, like it just starts studying with Inko, you know what I mean? And Inko can't do anything about it, you know what I mean? So she gets absolutely just not a fun time. And afterwards, this group of people would end up arriving out of nowhere. The people of Azarath. They end up saving Inko's life. And they teleport themselves out of there as fast as possible. With this happening, Trigon would watch all of this go down. And seeing as the summoning doesn't last for that long, it only lasts for a bit of time. The ritual that they did, at least. Trigon just pretty much ends up going back to his own dimension and wouldn't be able to go back to Earth to conquer it, which is what Trigon wanted to do. He wasted most of his time on Earth just straight studying with Inko, you know what I mean? And like this is not a pleasant study session, bro. Like, he is a, you know, for safe purposes, a demon, bro. So yeah, it's not fun. But what pretty much ends up happening after this is that when Deku's born, he grows up amongst the people of Azarath. And ever since he could be a little kid, he would remember many things. He would grow up having strange abilities, and most of the people of Azarath would teach him different things. They teach him their magic, their spells, and all of that. And that's where Deku would learn the abilities of Azarath, Metreon, Zinthos, right? And with that, he wants to find more out about himself, because all of this time that Deku would be around these people, he always felt like he just didn't fit in. For some reason or another, he felt a bit like an outcast. Think Naruto from the series Naruto. But no, seriously, just think like that. Like, he's basically outcasted just like Naruto was during his time of youth. And so Deku wanted to find out more about the creature that, you know, pretty much was the thing that gave him life. he does the ritual. And this time it would be a very different ritual. This one is a lot more potent. He has magic. He has the ability to give Trigon more time to be there. And the second that the fire would light ablaze and Deku sees what comes out of there, Deku would feel fear like never before. And it would almost be as if this would all go down in an instant. Trigon looks at him, smirks at him, and he just begins destroying everything. This world was peaceful. There was no war. There was nothing. They were just peaceful people, and Trigon comes in and destroys everything. And Deku has to watch and realize that it's all his fault. These people saved him, and he killed them. And that just leaves a permanent scar in Deku's mind that his curiosity got everybody killed. And after that happens, Trigon would take Deku to his own planet, his own world, his dimension, where Deku would see horrible things. He would pretty much be taken to hell itself, and one day after a couple of months would pass of Deku's hellish experiences, things so horrible I couldn't even begin to tell you guys what happens. Trigon finally has a strange idea. He thinks, what if he sends Deku back to Earth and uses him as a gateway to destroy that planet, to conquer it? If Deku was to lose control just enough, Trigon could use Deku as a vessel to get to Earth. That way he could conquer it. And Deku would be none the wiser. Deku would be not only helping him destroy the world of Azarath, but Earth too. And maybe Deku could become just as powerful as he can. Maybe Deku could be some sort of successor of sorts. And those are the plans that Trigon has for Deku. So he allows Deku to escape and think that he's the one that's doing it off of his own accord. Makes Deku think that he's the one that's willingly, escaping, and that he made it out, and that Trigon wasn't able to stop him, or he didn't figure out, and that by the time that Deku left, it was just too late, and Trigon just had no clue, right? But no, Trigon knew. And when Deku gets to Earth, when he arrives, he'd be in complete shambles. I mean, Deku's wearing rags for clothes, and he looks around and would ask for help. He'd be like, can anybody help me? Please. He'd be in the streets of Japan, literally begging for help like a homeless person. He doesn't want money. He just wants somebody to talk to. He wants somebody to take him somewhere where he can get some rest, some sleeps, anything. Deku's mind is so messed up right now, and his mental state is just not right. And nobody wants to help. Nobody cares. Deku's not used to this. He lived in the world of Azarath, where if he would have said the word help, even if people thought he was weird and didn't want to get close to him, they were gonna do it, because that's the kind of people that the people of Azarath were. But this planet, it's corrupted, and nobody helped. And this causes Deku to just lose it. After getting angry and being afraid of everything that's going on, Deku would let it take over, and his eyes would turn red. 3 more eyes or 4 more eyes would appear on his forehead as well. And he would begin destroying many things, injuring tons of people, until eventually heroes would arrive. And all of those heroes would all be stomped out by Deku. Think like when Tokiyami loses control of Dark Shadow. That's pretty much what ends up happening, but on a much larger scale, with power that you couldn't even imagine. Eventually, All Might arrives, and a bunch of top pro heroes would end up arriving as well. Endeavor being one of them, and Best Genius as well. Best Genius, using his his quirk, would try to hold Deku down, and Endeavor would shoot flames at him, but Deku just doesn't care. Those flames didn't even pinch him. He doesn't feel a thing. Eventually, All Might comes in, smiling as always, and he would try to get Deku to calm down. He'd be like, calm down, we're just trying to help. He'd think to himself that this kid might have just lost control of his quirk, right? And he's trying his best to just help Deku. Eventually, All Might would scream out, stop, you're gonna kill somebody. And once Deku hears that he's gonna kill someone, Deku just falls to his knees and just starts crying. He starts bawling his eyes out. Memories come flooding in from the planet of Azarath, and Deku is he just doesn't know what to do. He's lost. And eventually, he would be taken in by All Might. No handcuffs, no nothing. Just taken in by a police cruiser. Immediately upon arriving, Deku would be taken in for questioning. And the first person who would offer to do so would be Endeavor. possibly the worst choice they could have made. But Endeavor just looks towards the direction of Deku and would begin just telling him, "Why would you let your quirk go crazy? Do you have any idea how many people you hurt? How many people you could have killed?" And Deku, he just stays silent, saying, "I didn't mean to." And Endeavor, he's about to go in on Deku and make him angry or something, but All Might walks in and he would immediately pull up with his good cop, bad cop routine, right? And when All Might walks in, he looks towards Endeavor and gives him that look of stop. Endeavor says a couple more words to Deku, walks out of the room, and eventually All Might comes in and literally saves everyone's lives. One more outburst like that, and who knows if Deku could have controlled himself. That last time was nothing short of a miracle. And this time, it's going to take a whole lot more if Deku was to lose control again. Deku from here would begin to get questioned by All Might, who would take things slow, not rushing Deku, and they would stay in there for a grand total of 3 hours. And all Might would get from Deku would be that he's half demon. He can't control his powers and he just needed help. That's all he needed. Just help. Somebody to be there for him. And All Might understands this, and when the heroes decide what they're going to do to him, they all think to themselves that the right course of action is to throw him in a Tartarus and never look back. But All Might decides that there's no way they could do something like that to him. Deku was scared, alone, and he didn't mean to hurt all those people. He would tell them that maybe their best course of action would be to help him become a hero himself. It'd be better to have him on their side than on any other side. Plus, Deku needs guidance. He can't lose control over his powers again, and All Might isn't even sure if what Deku has is a quirk. Aizawa would enter, end up arriving at the police station, and using his erasure quirk on Deku would end up finding out what they were all fearing. Deku's abilities are nothing like a quirk, so if they were to put him in Tartarus regardless, those power dampening cuffs, they wouldn't work. Deku would still have access to all of his abilities, and the only thing that would possibly keep him sane would be if he was to become a hero and would be taught how to hold back his emotions. Eventually, Deku would be taken to a therapist about 3 times a week. Deku talks to him about literally nothing because he refuses to open up. Therapist tries to pry into Deku's personal life, but after a while, Deku got used to just dealing with people and ignoring them, becoming more and more like Raven every single day. They all want to figure out Deku, find some way to help him, but they just can't. And Deku's too afraid to lose control ever again to even want to use his powers at all. Eventually though, after a couple of months of this, All Might would finally talk it into Deku that those powers of him can help people. That there's a lot of quirks out there who are being used by heroes whose quirks seem very villainous, but when you stop to think about it, it's about who has the quirk. A villain could have his quirk and be the biggest villain ever, but luckily All Might has his own quirk. And Deku would answer, "Yeah, but your quirk doesn't have the potential to destroy a world, does it?" And All Might just looks down and says, "It doesn't. You're right. But your quirk also has the potential to save a world." And after hearing that, Deku's whole worldview just shifts. Deku finally, for the first time ever, would feel to himself that maybe he could do some good. Maybe his powers don't have to be something he fears. Maybe Deku can actually save somebody's life. And so Deku would begin finally training his abilities once again, beginning to trust All Might as a person and knowing that even though All Might's intentions are pure, Deku can't open himself up completely. All Might knows the bare minimum about Deku, and whenever Deku's not training with him or eating outside, Deku would just be in his room, locked up, just hiding away, keeping his emotions away, and meditating. That's the main thing that Deku would usually do with his time. Eventually though, Deku, after training with All Might for some time, All Might would see what Deku's powers are like, and it would be like night and day. It's almost like Deku's not even the same person. Deku's powers, the last time he saw him, were so powerful they were enough to potentially destroy a city, if not destroy even himself. He couldn't even keep up with Deku. Every time he tried to get close, Deku grabbed him with bindings and just slammed him to the floor. All Might felt like for the first time in forever, there was somebody he truly couldn't beat. But this The powers that Deku's displaying right now, it's nothing like it. He wonders to himself why this is. Why is he holding back so much? And he would ask Deku this. Why do you hold back so much, young Midoriya? And Deku would say that it's because of the fact that if he uses too much of his power, he might hurt somebody. Or, his powers are directly linked to his emotions, so he can't exactly use those. Because the more emotion he feels, the more risk there is for somebody to get hurt. That's why he meditates all the time. But it's not like it's his business. Eventually, Deku would be taken to UA, where he would be put in the recommendation exam. And Izuku would end up passing alongside people along the likes of Todoroki and Momo Yaoyorozu. During his time doing all of this stuff, Deku would have ended up finding out that All Might's not half a bad guy, and Nezu seems to have the best intentions. Nezu is a smart person at all, in fact, and it doesn't seem like Nezu wants anything bad to happen in general. Nezu seems like a kind-hearted individual. But eventually what would end up happening is that Deku would finally find himself in school. The first day of UA would finally come to pass, and when Deku was inside of the classroom, he would be the first one there. Eventually a blue-haired boy would end up walking in and sitting anywhere towards the front. Deku, noticing Aizawa sleeping on the floor, would just stay silent and meditate. Until eventually, a bunch of people would begin walking in and conversations would finally begin to be had. Eventually though, one blonde boy would enter the classroom, and it would be at this point that a bickering would finally start. Bakugo and Ida would immediately get into it. Ida telling Bakugo that it's not right to put his feet up there. He needs to get his feet off. It belongs to UA property. And Bakugo would say, shut it. I'm not here for people like you. Get that stick out of your ass out of there and get out of my way. And All Might, or sorry, not All Might, but Deku watching this all would just stay silent, getting irritated more and more by the second. Aizawa, who's already known about Deku and knows what would happen if Deku was to get irritated, would immediately stand up and with this quirk, look towards the direction of Ida and Bakugo, telling them both that if they don't stop right now, he'll expel the both of them. The next argument they have, they're out of here. And Bakugo would say, who are you? As Aizawa would say, I'm your homeroom teacher. Aizawa, put these on and meet me outside. Eventually after he says that, Uraraka would pipe up asking, what about orientation? And Aizawa would say that orientation's not important. It's just a moment where people are going to make you guys feel better than you are, and you're all going to get cocky and confident. I don't need that kind of attitude for my class. Now put these on and meet me outside. UA gives me permission to run my class as I see fit, and this is how I see it fit. So come outside, now. Eventually everybody goes to the changing room, and Deku would change into his outfit. People would see that Deku has a bunch of scars all over his body from his time being in Trigon's dimension, and Kirishima would say they're wicked cool. But Deku doesn't see anything cool about them. He would look at him with this expression of, why would you say that? And Kirishima would immediately back up. Deku eventually would make his way outside, and once there, Aizawa would toss the ball to Bakugo, who would get an impressive score. Everybody in the class would begin cheering and talking about how awesome it's going to be to use their quirks freely for the first time. How great it's going to be for them to, have their abilities on full blast. And Aizawa would scare them by saying that whoever comes in last place will be expelled. Deku, upon hearing this, wouldn't be afraid, knowing that even with the abilities that he can display, there's no way he'll get last place. They're still a lot stronger than most of the people here. So, Deku, using his magic, would end up using Azarath Metreon Zinthos through every single test he can, whether it be the 50-meter dash, the ball throw, the side-to-side steps, or things like that, the grip strength. He would crush each and every single one of the tests, and eventually end up getting first place. Why? Because his abilities are very diverse, and he could have had the ability to use them in every single test he wanted to. Deku's abilities were definitely something, and Deku was starting to feel, not so bad about it. Eventually though, what would pretty much end up going down is that after all of this would be said and done, Bakugo would begin to pretty much he'd begin to bitch about it, and everybody would just look at Bakugo and be like, what are you on about? But Bakugo would say, how is it that this loser was able to get such a high score and he was down there? He would question to himself whether this exam was rigged, and looking towards the direction of Aizawa, Deku would just give him this look of, can you shut him up? Aizawa would immediately shut Bakugo down, and eventually what would end up happening is he would tell them all to go home. Bakugo then right as class was about to end, would shove Deku's shoulder and hit him with his own, saying, "Oops, didn't see you there. But I probably won't be seeing a lot of you around, seeing as you really don't exist. You don't talk much and your quirk's weak. You think I didn't notice? That quirk of yours is nothing." And Deku would look at him and say, "Shut up." Before Bakugo would say, "Huh? You say something? Why don't you say it to my face?" And Deku would look at him once more before saying, "Shut up!" Immediately, Izuku's eyes would turn red, and his powers would begin to start taking control. Aizawa, once seeing this, would immediately come in and cancel Bakugo's quirk, saying, "Do you realize what you've just done? That kid has enough power to level a city, and you're over here messing with him? What, to try to get a rise out of him? That's exactly what we're trying to avoid, Bakugo. Why would you do that to him? What kind of a hero acts like this?" And Bakugo would look at Aizawa with this expression of like, "I didn't know, like, get off my case, old man." He then looks at Deku and says, "Deku, calm down." Before then, Izuku would look at him with that expression that he saw once more, and Izuku would turn into a gigantic raven form, trying to take control of everything that's happening, and he would begin to go absolutely haywire, attacking the class and the heroes. Eventually, they would all come in and try to stop him, and Deku would be taking out heroes left and right, until eventually, Midnight would end up arriving, and with the power of her quirk, her gas that can pretty much knock people out, her pheromones, she would put Deku to sleep. When he would wake up a couple of hours later, Deku and everybody else would be present for a meeting, and All Might would stand up for Deku. Now, the meeting would be held in front of All Might, and at first it would be docile, calm, and they wouldn't really say anything too offensive, but eventually they would say, "Izuku, step out, please." He would do so, and eventually the heroes would start talking about Deku. Everybody would say, "Oh, he's a danger. He should be locked in Tartarus, yada, yada, yada." Some people think that he's too much of a loose case, a loose cannon. And then other people would begin to say that Bakugo should be expelled. But Nezu would finally stand up and be like, "Listen, Izuku's quirk is very powerful, and we can't exactly just throw him in prison. It's not his fault he can't control his own powers. When it comes to Bakugo, however, he has phenomenal potential, and if he was to be guided properly, he'll be a remarkable hero. On the contrary, if we were to throw him out of UA, judging by his personality, he'll probably be unstable, most likely running into villainy, and we don't need another villain on the loose, especially not with a quirk like his." Eventually, everybody would kind of begin to agree with this point, and eventually All Might would stand up and say, "Yeah, that's right, but the kid should not be targeted for any of this. It's not like it's his fault. He isn't responsible for this. And I don't know why you guys treat him as such. He wasn't taught how to use his powers properly, nor to control his emotions. He just needs time. Trust me, with some time, he could potentially become the #1 hero someday. You guys just have to put some more faith in him. Plus, with Midnight around here, we could always potentially put a stop to him, right? We just have to play our cards right and make sure that the kid's raised properly, make sure that we train him properly, and for the most part, we have to make sure that we guide him properly. As heroes, it's our duty to do this for other people. So why can't we do this for this kid? We can't just abandon him and cast him out as a villain. That's not what he is. The kid's a good kid." And after Deku hears that through the walls, Deku would smile for the very first time in a minute, right? And he would just look towards All Might as he would come outside, and Deku, he doesn't know why, but for some reason, he just needs to give All Might a hug. When All Might comes out, Deku would come in and just give All Might the biggest hug ever, saying thank you. As from here, All Might would say, "Of course, young Midoriya, but thanks for what?" And Deku would say, "Nothing." Nothing, right? Just like playing it off cool like that just didn't just happen. All Might would smile and then say, "Don't worry, kid. I won't mention him." And from here, Izuku would be like, "Thanks," as they would just go off to Deku's house. Eventually, a couple of days later, they would end up agreeing to have a little bit of a course on telling them what exactly Deku is and why Deku can't control this quirk. The entire class, once hearing this, would end up having mixed opinions. People would begin to judge him and stay away from him. A bunch of people would think that Deku's villainous. A bunch of people would think that, Bakugo might have actually been in the right for picking on him. And a bunch of people would just form their own opinions on him, but the majority standards would be that they're afraid of him. Everybody, except for Chaku, Tokiyami, and Kaminari, who sort of understand what it's like. The main one being Tokiyami. I mean, after all, Deku and Tokiyami's personalities, they kind of complement each other perfectly. There's no real reason for me not to make that be the case. And eventually, even though Deku would be distant at first from those 3 individuals, they'll probably eventually win him over. We would finally skip to the day of the heroes versus villains event, and on this particular day, everybody would just be waiting as the hero would end up coming in to train them. To their surprise, All Might would walk in, and when All Might steps in the area, everybody would be shocked and would begin praising All Might immediately. Following this, they would end up picking their slots after getting changed into their hero costumes, and once that happens, Deku would be paired up with Ochako or Araka versus Katsuki, Bakugo, and Ida. And after this would happen, he would be told that he needs to learn how to handle people being, mean and evil towards him. So Nezu would pull him aside and tell him all these things, saying that who better to try to, make you feel better about controlling your emotions than Bakugo. Of course, he's going to get on your nerves and say things that are going to rile you up, but maybe that's what you need. You need to be able to, calm down against people like him, because when you become a hero, there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be saying horrible things to you. There's going to be a lot of people who are going to be trying to provoke you as much as possible. It's your job as a hero to go through these trials and tribulations and make sure that you don't let them get to you. Understood, Izuku? And Izuku would look towards the direction of Nezu before saying, "Yeah, I get it." And from here, Nezu would smile and say, "Good, well, I'll be on my way now." Before Izuku would grab a little bit of a paper that just gives him a direction of what the building looks like. And eventually Izuku would decide that they're going to just go looking for the bomb. Deku knows that Bakugo's probably going to go after him first. So what Deku would do is, using one of his abilities that he has access to, the one that Raven mainly uses in Teen Titans, he would use a portal to pretty much go straight through the door. Now, once that would happen, Izuku walks into the door, and once he hears Bakugo coming in blasting explosions, Izuku would immediately grab Araka towards him and pull her into the portal with him. They would both remain silent as Bakugo would say, "Deku!" going in, blasting explosion after explosion, and Deku would hear all of this commotion going on as he would then begin to spout nonsense after nonsense. Araka would look at him and say not to pay attention to him, that the best way to get past people like that is to just ignore them, and that it doesn't matter what horrible things he says, whether it's that he's poor or any of those things, he should always just keep his head forward and keep pushing. And after hearing this, Izuku would wonder why she used the example of being poor. But ultimately, Izuku would realize that he can't just stand here and hide forever. Eventually, he's going to have to fight. So looking at Araka, he would nod towards her before he then makes his way outside, transforming into his Raven form, appearing in front of Bakugo. Izuku from here would create a barrier in front of Bakugo, and he would trap him inside of a ball of magic. And Bakugo would immediately begin shooting explosion after explosion after explosion, just talking mess while inside of this ball. And, he would just keep going and going and going and going and going. He is not helping the situation whatsoever. But eventually Deku would get more enraged and angry, and his emotions would get stronger and stronger. The ball would contain Bakugo more and more, and Bakugo would eventually just be like, "Whatever, it's the only reason you have me in here is because you can't beat me one-on-one." And one of Deku's eyes would turn red as Izuku would try to calm himself down, and he would do so, letting Bakugo go before Bakugo would say "perfect," pulling both pins off of his gauntlets and saying "die," as both of the explosions would go shooting straight at the direction of Deku, and Deku would be forced to put up a barrier of magic which would hold off most of the explosion. However, it would send him back flying into the wall. Once seeing this, Bakugo shoots off towards the direction of Deku and punches him straight in the face. Following this, by grabbing him by the collar and picking him up and telling him he's nothing. After this, Deku's eyes would both immediately turn red, and he would begin to just body Bakugo. He humbles him in the worst way possible. He would say, "Let's see what your true colors are like after you get traumatized and see what I've seen." He drags Bakugo in by the leg, and he would try his absolute hardest not to. And All Might would be telling Deku, "Stop, stop, stop," over the intercom. But Deku would drag him into the darkness, just like Raven would have done so to Dr. Light in the episode Through Time, or something like that, I forgot. But what would pretty much end up going down is that Deku would just he would just subject Bakugo to seeing some horrible things. And when Bakugo comes out, he would definitely be hindered mentally by this, getting humbled immediately, seeing many of the things that Izuku saw in Trigon's world, and he's just not having a good time. During the heroes versus villains attack, which would end up happening, oh no, not heroes versus villains attack, but hero versus villains event, eventually Deku would let Bakugo go and the test would pretty much be stopped. Everything stops, and eventually Deku would be sent home, told that he shouldn't worry about it, that they'll pick this off another day, right? And Deku would say, sure, fine, be like that. Deku on his way out would hear everybody in class 1A just mumbling and talking about him. And he knows exactly what they're saying. He doesn't belong in UA. He's a villain. Why is he here? Those are the only things that he would hear. Except two people. One person in particular would speak up first. Tokiyami. He would say that he belongs in UA as much as anybody else does. And that just because one time he let loose, maybe twice, that doesn't mean that he doesn't belong here. He would say he has a great future as a hero and that everybody else should stop counting him out just because of one mistake that he made. It's not his fault that he can't control his quirk. If he was just given the chance to train and keep learning as they are, then one day he could control his quirk. And with power like that, just imagine how great of a hero he'd be. I mean, sometimes he can't control his quirk either. Does that mean he's a villain and he should be thrown out too? Everybody would kind of quiet down, and eventually Kaminari would say, yeah, you know, you're right. I can't control my quirk at all either, and whenever I overdo it, I become a total dummy. I mean, I guess while it's not the same as Deku, it's sort of similar, so I guess I can kind of relate to him. And Ochako, who would hear all this going down, would say, it's not his fault. You guys heard all the mean things that Bakugo said to him. Plus, when he used that explosion, that was completely uncalled for. I think Deku had every right to do what he did. And are we not going to say anything about Bakugo's behavior? If anyone's a villain in the course, it's him. And he's the one who keeps getting opportunity after opportunity to make Deku mad. Deku would hear this and would have a smile on his face. For the first time, some people actually stood up for him. And you know what? It felt kind of nice. Eventually on his way out, Deku would be stopped by Nezu, who would ask Izuku if he would be willing to stay for a cup of tea. Deku would look at him and would say, are you sure about that? You're not afraid of me or anything? And Nezu would say, trust me, kid. I'm not afraid of you. Before then, offering him some tea and asking Izuku what he thinks about his fur. Izuku would quickly go on to compliment Nezu's fur, saying that it seems to him like he takes quite good care of himself. And he would ask Nezu if he has some sort of dog quirk or some sort of IQ quirk. I mean, Deku is quite intelligent for a principal. And eventually Nezu would say that he was experimented on by a bunch of humans, but he's over it now and he's promised to help the betterment of human society from now on. Izuku would say that that's quite a past, and eventually they begin to get onto a more serious topic. Nezu would say that Izuku's potential as a hero is great, and that he understands that if they were to lock Izuku up, Izuku would probably get mad and not exactly be too favorable towards the people of Earth, right? Izuku would say that, you know, he's not wrong in that. And Izuku would then say that, is that the only reason you guys haven't thrown me in jail yet? And Nezu would say, no, quite the contrary actually. The only reason we haven't thrown you in jail is because we know it wouldn't work regardless. I mean, kid, let's be honest here. You get mad enough, you could blow a hole right through that prison if you truly wanted to. There's no point. I say, better for us to use your abilities than to keep them hidden forever, right? And Nezu would kind of chuckle after saying that, before asking Izuku why his abilities are the way that they are and why Izuku came to be the way that he is. Izuku would say, well, it's like this. Long ago, when my mom was young, she was into a lot of weird things and eventually she got into a cult. That led her to performing a ritual and surprise, surprise, it actually worked. She eventually ran into a demon and that demon ended up having not so fun of a study session with her. After that happened, I was then immediately saved by the people of Azarath, a people from another dimension. And with that happening, I was finally able to be taken somewhere where, honestly, I didn't fit in. Wanted to know more about my past so I can maybe understand myself better. I did the ritual myself and that brought the demon Trigon to the planet of Azarath. He destroyed everything and conquered it and took me to his own world, where I saw horrors unbearable, things that I couldn't even imagine were there. And then I escaped. I fled to this planet, and When I arrived, well, the rest is history. But that's what happened. And Nezu would say, wow, kid. Well, I was experimented on, but what you had happen to you was crazy to say the least. Izuku would say that, yeah, it was, but he's over it now. And Nezu would say that he understands. He won't pester him or bug him about this, and that could be their own little secret. Nezu would say he's great at keeping those. After all, he keeps a couple of secrets for a bunch of heroes that work at his school. And eventually, Izuku would kind of do like a little bit of a half smile before then finally making his way home, only to see All Might ending up arriving and just going to his room before bro just straight passes out. Eventually, what would happen is they would finally end up being told about the USJ events, and they'd be told that they need their parent or guardian to sign a paper. Eventually, Deku would give his paper to All Might, and All Might would sign off for Deku to go to the USJ. On that particular day, just like in the original, All Might would overdo himself, and eventually, they would all end up making their way towards the bus. Once they end up arriving, immediately Deku would sense something strange inside of that building. He would say, wait, that building feels strange. There's so much negative emotion coming off from there. It's so much bloodlust. Deku could sense villains, and Deku would say that they should probably call for reinforcements, before saying that he's gonna go to the bathroom. In reality, Deku just has some steam to blow off, and Deku would use his Raven-like powers to go straight through the wall, making his way inside with his, aura popping up of the Raven effect, right? And eventually, Izuku would rise to the air, flying up and say, Azeroth Metreon Zinthos! Before then shooting a massive amount of energy at the direction of a couple of villains, blowing a little crater in the middle and then blasting them all to the ground, taking them all out each individually. Immediately after seeing this, a bunch of villains would shoot their quirks at the direction of Deku, and Deku immediately would get down. He just starts fighting them one by one by one. But since it's been shown in the show Teen Titans multiple times over and over that Raven can be defeated by just a bunch of people and overwhelmed, that's exactly what would happen. Eventually, one of the villains would say that it would be fun to find out what's underneath all that armor. Bro's a weirdo, by the way. And once Izuku hears that, he would remember all the horrible things that he saw in Trigon's world. And immediately, Izuku would feel all this rage just bubbling up inside of him, and he needs to let it out. Izuku would just let go. Almost let go completely. Because he still has a little bit of sense of reason there. Trigon isn't able to take advantage of this and summon himself and his soldiers to this world, which means that all the people from this planet are currently safe, and eventually Izuku would begin to absolutely get down and just demolish villain after villain after villain, using the power of darkness to just straight overwhelm every single villain. Eventually all the heroes would end up wanting to get there and save, not save the villains, but prevent the villains from getting killed. Izuku would have already had finished all of them basically, and the only ones left were Shigaraki and Kurogiri. Shigaraki would scream out, Kurogiri, the Nomu! And eventually the Nomu would teleport in front of Deku. Or no, not teleport in front of him, but it would appear in front of him so fast using its speed. Deku would have a villainous smile on his face before then sucking the Nomu into himself and shooting it out. The Nomu would be unaffected, and Izuku would think to himself that that's interesting, before then grabbing the Nomu and just crushing it, just straight destroying it completely. From here, Kurogiri would be shocked and would try to teleport Shigaraki away, but Izuku would end up just being like, destroying Kurogiri in an instant, and then looking at Shigaraki before he permanently just traumatizes Shigaraki for life and would say that it's not nice to hate All Might, before then killing him and making sure that he got his point across. Eventually, a bunch of the heroes would end up arriving, and Midnight would use her pheromones along with Cementos because he tried to attack, Midnight mid using her quirk. And so eventually the pheromones would be able to take Izuku out, and Cementos would be able to hold Deku off just long enough for the effect to go into effect. Eventually, they notice that a bunch of the villains are in really critical condition, and a lot of them need the medical assistance ASAP, so the USJ cleanup happens differently than in the original, and this event would actually be able to be kept under wraps, not told to anybody since none of the students got hurt. Eventually, after this, school would continue for a following week, in which Aizawa would end up telling all the students the fact that they're going to be having the UA Sports Festival very soon. And following that, what would end up happening is eventually just the sports festival itself would go down. On this particular day, because Izuku took the recommendations exam, he wouldn't be the one to give the speech, and instead it would be Bakugo. He tells everybody just like he would in the original that he's gonna win, and as soon as that would be said, Midnight would go onto the speakerphone and say, "You guys ready?" Before the crowd would immediately get pumped up and hyped, and Midnight would then begin to tell everybody that they're going to start off this whole thing with the first event, the race. Before all of them would change into their little gym outfits, and eventually the first event would start. Izuku, using his power of flight, would fly towards the direction of the finish line. However, in the middle of it, Bakugo and Todoroki would be trying to fight against Deku mid-air. Deku, using his abilities of Azarath, Metreon, Zinthos, and magic and such, would be able to shoot dark beams at them, which would ultimately keep them at bay, and Izuku would be the one who ends up getting first place in the first event. Following this, Izuku would have a team comprised of Kaminari, Ochako Araraka, and Tokiyami. And Izuku, using his abilities of forming a force field like cocoon thing with darkness, would do so, creating it instantly so that nobody else could take their 10 million point headband from them. And eventually Tokiyami would even use Dark Shadow to form a different layer of cocoon around them. Uraraka would make them weightless, and Kaminari would just be ready to zap if anyone was to break through it. Eventually, after a bit of time would pass, Bakugo and his squad would rush over towards it, and he would shoot explosions against the barrier, shaking it a little bit and shaking everybody inside of it. But Deku, concentrating just enough, would be able to keep it up. Keep it up, and that's what she said. He would be able to keep it up, and Deku would pretty much end up just glazing by the first event, ultimately leading to the 1v1 battles, which Deku would, of course, face off against Shinso. As soon as the battle starts, Shinso would end up speaking and saying a bunch of stuff to Deku, but Deku would just ignore him, not letting him like affect him the way that Bakugo did, seeing as he's been meditating and stuff like that over the past time that he's had available to pretty much just get right with himself. And the reason he's had to do that is because honestly, he's been feeling a lot of dark energy bubbling inside of him, and he just wants to make sure that he can calm down a bit because he's been having visions of his father. And he tries his best to put them off as much as possible, but it's just hard. Eventually, what would end up arriving though is that Deku would end up defeating Shinso through not paying attention to him or any of the things that Shinso would say, and essentially what would go down is just that Shinso would end up being defeated. Following that, a dark portal would end up arriving in the middle of everything, and All For One would step through it, before then clapping and saying that it's such a momentous occasion. Everybody that wants to die lined up for him today, and immediately All Might, upon realizing that All For One arrived, would buff up immediately before rushing in, and All For One would form a barrier. Izuku, immediately realizing what's going on, would shoot his abilities at the direction of this villain that's standing in front of him, and using his abilities of flight would shoot a bunch of beams of, like, you know, the projectiles that Raven's able to throw. He just throws a bunch of those at the direction of All For One. However, All For One, using the shield and stuff like that, would be able to hold off against those attacks. Eventually, a flood of Nomus would end up arriving. High ends, middle ends, and low end Nomus would all flood into the UA Sports Festival, and a bunch of people would end up getting attacked, which means that all the heroes can't really help All Might. So even though all the other heroes want to help him, they can't exactly do so with all this chaos ensuing. All the hero students would quickly be told to evacuate the area, not being allowed to help out in the situation at all. And since Deku's mid-stadium as well as Shinso, once he gets up would use his quirk on a bunch of villains, helping out a ton actually, and Izuku, using his abilities of magic, would end up helping a ton as well. Eventually, what would end up going down is just an all-out brawl between the heroes and the villains goes down, and as this is all happening, Deku, watching all the chaos and the people dying, would begin getting like Vietnam flashbacks kind of what happened in his planet of Azarath, right? Somebody came in through a portal and just started killing people, and Deku's just like heavily breathing. He's like, what's going on? You know what I mean? And eventually what would end up going down is that he looks towards the direction of All Might, and he would just see that All Might is just standing still. It looks like All For One broke All Might, because he just told them the revelation of how Shigaraki was actually the grandson of Nana Shimura, and how he's dead now because of one of his successors. And All For One truly feels like a broken man All Might truly feels like a broken man at this point, just looking at the direction of All For One with an expression of, I've lost, you know? And then All For One shoots black tendrils at the direction of All Might, which would pierce him immediately, and Deku would fly over towards All Might, grabbing his body and saying, you can't leave me. You're the only good thing that's happened to me ever since I got to this planet. Please, I need a mentor. How am I supposed to continue without you? But All Might looks at him, grabs him by the shoulder, and would be like, use it, kid. Don't be afraid. Control the power. Don't let it consume you. Go beyond plus ultra. And he would finally breathe his last breath, shrinking into a Small Might form before dying, and All For One would laugh. Deku would just sit there and for a solid 10 seconds would just stay still. His eyes would flick between red and white pupils, and Izuku would begin floating up into the air. Izuku's body just doesn't know how to react, but he looks at the direction of All For One time, and like he just closes his fist. All For One would just get completely like crushed under the force of a barrier of magic that Izuku would create, just destroying All For One immediately. And then he would then look up into the sky before a smirk would come across his face, and all 6 eyes would end up appearing on Deku's face with the mark of Trigon, before then all of a sudden Trigon would end up entering the world. Through a portal that Izuku would have been responsible for opening, Trigon would look down at the direction of Izuku before saying, "You've done well, my son. Now, kill them all." And Izuku would just lose himself. This time, Izuku would be a big part of the reason that a bunch of the people would lose their lives on this particular day. Izuku, last time, just watched helplessly as Trigon did whatever he did. But this time Izuku was taken control over by Trigon, and once everything was said and done and Japan was left in complete ruin, it was taken over by Trigon completely. Eventually Izuku would regain his sense of self after having killed millions, and eventually look up into the sky before seeing Trigon and just feeling genuine fear. This Deku doesn't have the help of the Titans and that bond of friendship to keep him afloat. Nobody's there, and Izuku would even notice that right in front of him are the bodies of Uraraka, Kaminari, and Tokiyami. Izuku would feel tears just dropping down his face, and he doesn't know how to react, what to say, how to feel. Izuku feels like a truly broken man at this point, and he just stares at them. He just looks and would cry. It's just silent. And Izuku would just look at Trigon before saying, "Why did you have to come here? This world was so peaceful, but you had to ruin everything, just like you did at Azarath. You can't let me have my peace, can you?" And Trigon would say, "Why let you have peace? If you could join me and conquer worlds, wouldn't that be more fun than living a peaceful life among these runts? You're more powerful than them. You'll outlive them. Join me, and together we can..." But Izuku would just stay silent before looking at him and saying that he hates him. With all of his heart, he hates him. Why couldn't he have just let him be happy? Why couldn't Izuku just have lived a normal life? But Trigon would tell him that it's Izuku's fault. Had he just kept his emotions at bay and remained calm, this would have never happened. Izuku was responsible for the death of this planet, as well as Azarath. His own inability to control his powers were the downfall of 2 worlds. Which world is next, Trigon would say, before then saying that he can't wait for Izuku to flee to another planet so that he can plunder that one as well. And Izuku would look towards the direction of Trigon before then rushing at him, but Trigon would straight just flick Deku down and destroy him, shooting a beam of energy so powerful at Deku that would completely incapacitate Deku and immobilize him for the day. Deku would wake up about a week later after his injuries would finally heal, and he would just look around to see so much chaos, rubble, and destruction. A bunch of minions would just stand there. And while all this would be happening, Izuku would think to himself that maybe it would have been better if he was never born. But Just as Izuku was thinking these thoughts, it would be at this world that a random portal would end up arriving and opening right in front of him. Deku would be like, what is that? It's a white portal. And Deku would be thinking to himself that it's probably to another world for Trigon to destroy, right? But then, when he looks inside, he sees himself. And for some reason, he'd be wearing a different outfit. His hair would be done differently, and Izuku would wonder what in the world this is. But suddenly, Izuku would see the other person enter, and it would be revealed that it's Robin Deku. Izuku would see this and would be like, who are you? And Izuku from the other dimension where he's Robin would say, who are you? My name's Robin. And Izuku would just look at him and be like, what's going on? But ultimately, Robin Deku would say, what happened to this world? It looks like a war went down. Did the villains and heroes not end up winning this time? And Izuku would look at him and say, it wasn't any villains. I mean, I guess you could call them that, but it was Trigon.